Welcome, everyone. We will start in a minute. Okay. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome to today's Tools and Solutions webinar. This event is organized through the Food and Agricultural Commodity Systems community. And my name is Alexandra Atalla, and I will be moderating today's session on behalf of our community of practice. So thank you for joining us. As usual, I see many familiar names and faces, but I also see some new ones. So I would encourage everyone to introduce themselves using the chat box. We'd love to hear where are you joining us from, which organization you're representing, working for, and any other information that you would like to drop and share with the other participants. So just in terms of logistics, we have a simultaneous interpretation. So if any one of you is more comfortable listening to the content of this session in Spanish, please choose the Spanish channel through Zoom. The instruction will be posted in the chat box. And before starting, I would obviously like to welcome warmly our speakers. So we have today with us Charles O'Malley, who's the Senior Systems Change Advisor, and Andrea Bina, who's the Monitoring, Evaluation, and Learning Specialist. Both of them are working with the Food and Agricultural Systems team at UNDP. And before giving them the floor, I will share with you briefly the agenda of today's session. So in a few seconds, Charlie will be setting the scene for us and we'll be talking about complexity and systems thinking in food and agriculture, especially when it comes to planning and implementing projects. Afterwards, Andrea will be talking about why we need to rethink monitoring, learning, and evaluation in food and agriculture. And will be giving us some examples of work that has been done to date, including sharing with us an initiative that has recently started called the Systems Monitoring, Learning, and Evaluation Initiative, which the team has been working on and which is founded by the Gates Foundation. Then we will get to the most important question in terms of monitoring, learning, and evaluation. So how do we know whether there is a positive shift in the food system we are working on? And here, basically, Andrea will walk us through different frameworks, existing frameworks on documenting systems change. Before closing the event, we will have a space for you to share with us basically your thoughts and your experience and anything that relates to systems transformation in your area of work. Doesn't need to be specifically food and agriculture. And you'll be sharing with us your insights. So with this, I will be handing over to Charlie. I hope you all enjoyed this session. Thank you.
Thanks, Alex. I'm going to guess that probably all of you know who we are, the Food Agricultural Commodity Systems team at UNDP. If you don't, happy to sort of say hi and connect with you for the first time. We've been working on commodity production, sustainable commodity production for a number of years. We're now working more broadly on food systems and trying to bring a systemic approach to how you catalyze change and transformation of the food system. And I'm guessing that most of you are working for organizations that are talking liberally about sector transformation and systems change and systems transformation, etc. But by and large, most of us are still working within fairly traditional project structures and fairly traditional M&E systems, which aren't necessarily that conducive or supportive of systemic approaches to change. So this is work that we've been involved in doing for a number of years, but we are happy to have partnered with the Bill Melinda Gates Foundation on this project over the next couple of years, doing a deep dive into how do you do monitoring, learning and evaluation to support systemic approaches to change in food systems. And we're partnering with the Strategic Innovation Unit at UNDP, who are also have been doing a lot of work on this across the organization, and with their M&E sandbox, sort of bringing in a wider community of practitioners. So I'm just gonna share fairly briefly, hopefully, some high-level thoughts on why do we need to be thinking about MLE differently for systems change, just in terms of some wider context and framing around food systems and what do we mean by systems change and systems transformation. And then I'm going to hand over to Andrea, who's going to go into a little bit more detail on some of our thinking and what this project is about. For us, this is really a kickoff call on this project. It's running for the next couple of years, and we're really looking to engage with other practitioners to share learning, to learn from each other, to see how we can collaborate and partner. So next slide, please. Yes, the poll. So before we get into it, if you can all go to menti.com, and the Menti code is there in the on the slide. But if I just can somebody type it into the chat?
It's already in the chat box.
Okay.
Thank you, Charlie.
So yeah, actually you can just click on that link and it'll take you through to a Menti poll, just to see where we're starting from in terms of current levels of knowledge and practice in relation to systems approaches. So just two questions. First one, to what extent are you clear of what systems transformation means in your sector? Okay, that's a promising result. Most of us think we have a clue about what we're doing, which is encouraging. I can't see how many people have answered it so far.
18, Charlie.
Okay, so we've got 41 people on the call, so if anyone hasn't answered this yet, we'll give you a few more seconds. Okay, shall we move on to the next question? To what extent do you feel equipped for tracking whether system transformation is happening in your sector? Okay, so for most of us, the answer is not so much. So that probably includes most of us in the FACS team at UNDP, certainly me included. And so that's what we're hoping to do through the life of this project, is to become a little smarter in terms of how we track systems change in the work that we're doing. So thanks for that. And back to the slides. Next one. So I'm just going to do a quick romp through a few visual images to hopefully illustrate the point. This is a sort of an image, actually comes from our sustainable commodities work, but a sort of fairly classic image of a production landscape, farm landscape, regional, national level, and then a value chain, traders, producers, retailers, consumers. And often when we're doing so-called sort of sector transformation work, we might be thinking in these terms. We're thinking in terms of production, we're thinking in terms of enabling environment at the landscape and national and global levels. We're thinking about policy interventions. We're thinking about interventions through supply chains. And this is perhaps, certainly a more holistic view than if we were just zooming straight in on the farm level and doing some farmer training. We're thinking about the wider context. But if you want to click to the next slide. This is a somewhat more complete picture of a food system, so detailed that we can't even read it. But looking at the many interconnected elements of a food system that connects, across multiple crops, commodities, livelihoods, technology, health, environment, vast complexity of both in the production landscapes, in the local, regional, national context where food is being produced, and in the global supply chains. And of course, even this is an incredible simplification, because in reality, there's kind of an infinite level of complexity. It's convenient to kind of reduce it down to a few simple elements. But when working systemically, we begin to sort of grapple with ultimately the unknowability of a system that is so fundamentally complex. Next slide. This was from an EFAD survey in 2021, asking several hundred agri-food professionals what they thought were the key challenges in food systems, the key drivers, and the priority intervention areas. And these are prioritized according to the answers that they came up with. But as you can see, there's a plethora of different considerations in terms of challenges, drivers, intervention areas. But typically when we're running a project, normally the donor is coming from a particular point of view. It might be focused, a lot of our work's been focused on reducing deforestation. So you have a bunch of metrics around ultimately the kind of outcomes of reducing deforestation. And a lot of the other considerations, maybe around some of the social aspects, definitely around things like nutrition, wider social cultural considerations wouldn't be in the theory of change, wouldn't necessarily be in the log frame, etc. We wouldn't be attending to them, even though they're fundamentally integrated. So typically what we look at depends on who's funding us and what are their funding priorities. The result is we end up with these overly simplistic ways of thinking about fundamentally complex systems. Next slide. So gross simplification, but typical sort of project approach is we got problem A and we're going to move to solution B. And it's a bit more elaborate than that, of course. Normally sort of a document that runs to several hundred pages with multiple different annexes, but still the same logic applies, that we can analyze a problem, we can come up with a logical set of interventions which are going to have some sort of predictable outcome. Next slide. But when you're working with complexity, the reality is the complexity is such that you can never understand it. You can create educated guesses, you can develop hypotheses, but ultimately you need to be constantly paying attention to what happens and learning from that. Andrea will go into that a little bit more, but that's the kind of the necessity of the multi-stakeholder approaches is you need to get multiple views into this to be able to make sense of it. Next slide. So there's a sort of a systems map of the food system, and I'm sure we're all familiar with these systems maps. These can still give the illusion of some sort of rational analysis that's going to have predictable results. The reality is that the connections between all these different dots are way more complicated than is illustrated here, and also the predictability of what happens in terms of positive and negative feedback loops is way more complex than we can ever understand. But at least this begins to grapple a bit better with complexity than a sort of traditional linear log frame approach. Next slide. So a lot of this comes from Karl Popper. Karl Popper talked about clock problems and cloud problems. A clock problem is, think of a clock, it might be incredibly complicated, but ultimately it's logical. You can break it down to parts, and you know that if you know how the parts interrelate, they have direct relationships in terms of causality. So it's predictable, controllable, and bounded. Next slide. Whereas systems are much more like clouds. They're infinitely complex, unpredictable, hard to control, endless and evolving. Most of our M&E systems assume that we're operating in a clock world. And increasingly, we're trying to work in a sort of cloud reality, but our M&E systems haven't caught up with that. So what does an M&E system or a monitoring, learning, and evaluation system look like when you try to work with a kind of cloud world? Next slide. And just click through 4 times. That's it. And then my last slide here is just also thinking about leverage points. A lot of our interventions might be looking at the level of, you know, in the UNDP, we're looking at kind of policy interventions. So we're often looking at rules, incentive structures, but are we also considering culture, values, beliefs, narratives, assumptions that underlie system? And if we are, well, what are they? And it's not just one set of beliefs. Beliefs is a complex sort of, it may be different for different stakeholders. So what are these beliefs and norms and expectations? How are we attempting to influence them? How would we even know if they were changing? Do we have any way of measuring whether they're changing or not? So that's just a super quick sort of rush through a bit of systems framing. Now onto Andrea for the more substantive piece.
Great, thanks, Charlie. Good to see you. Hi, everyone, and good to see such diverse group interested in this topic. So moving to the next slide. Based on the presentation that Charlie just gave, and this description of the complexity and how complexity unfolds in food systems and many other systems, we're moving now to the part where we like trying to discuss with you why we need to rethink monitoring, learning, and evaluation. And there are like 3 main reasons and that are showcased here. And the first one is that when we move and when we operate in such complex systems, it's very rare to know upfront exactly how to solve problems, how to solve complex problems. So we need to be continuously able to learn and adapt and figure out our way through. Especially as I was saying, like it's not clear up front which are the results, which are exactly the results that we can achieve. and also, the pathways through which we can achieve such results. So we need to be continuously able to make sense of what's happening in the system, and adapt our projects or programs or portfolios so that we can absorb the learnings and be able to implement more effective interventions. Another reason is that systemic change takes time to materialize. So, how do we know whether we are on track to catalyze, to contribute to catalyze systems transformation, when often, we don't know yet. We don't see results materializing, outcomes materializing yet, as systemic transformation often takes many years. And this is very tied to the question of accountability to our donors, to also our beneficiaries, and also the fact that often we work with very short time projectized interventions, where achieving results is required. Certain results is required by donors, but then when we work for towards systemic transformation, we need to acknowledge that such a short time frame is not necessarily or is not the best way to be able to know whether we are making any sorts of progress. And finally, systemic change is also results of a variety of synergetic efforts. It's never the result of one single intervention, of one single project. So we need to be better in understanding how different efforts interact with each other, and beyond interacting with each other, how they interact with the system in which we are operating. And only if we are able to do so, then we can effectively move beyond the discussion among contribution and attribution, and how do we know whether we are having an impact and contributing to systems transformation in the end. So starting from these premises, we just recently, as mentioned briefly before by Charlie, we recently embarked on a new initiative at UNDP with the Bill Melinda Gates Foundation, where we want to move beyond just the theoretical reasons of why we need to rethink M&E, but really get into practice and explore firsthand what it means to transform the way we work with monitoring, evaluation, and learning, and what it means to be able to institutionalize as well the new practice that we are exploring. So this is the objective of our initiative. We're working on we are aiming to improve knowledge and awareness on appropriate methods, approaches, and tools that can help organizations working on in the development, development actors to measure system transformation within and also beyond food and agricultural system, as we're trying to learn from what's happening also in other sectors. The initiative is guided by two core learning questions. The first one is, how do we know if we're making progress and generating results and contributing to positive change in a complex system? And the second one is, how do we use monitoring, learning, and evaluation processes and the insights that they can provide to continuously learn and adapt when engaging in complex systems? And we also have a series of sub-questions, of course, that are helping us to structure the initiative tied to these core questions. These are the components of our program, of our initiative. We are trying to address these questions through 4 different work streams. The first one is about documenting what's existing. So we're doing 2 literature reviews. One which is more focused about the M&E methods and tools that can equip better practitioners to work more systemically and to support their efforts in contributing to systems transformation in their sector. And the other literature is more focused about, okay, so when we apply all of this to the food system space, what does it mean? What is food systems transformation? What is positive transformation? How do we balance, different perspectives of what positive change is in the sector, and so on and so forth. And as we do that, we're also doing some case studies that help us to document, ongoing experiences, ongoing experiments that are not already documented in any sort of literature. The second portion is about convening and connecting. We have a community of practice on M&E for systems change, which is called the M&E Sandbox, the UNDP. And we're also launching a food systems learning journey, which we will be exploring, what is systems transformation in different sorts of food systems. We're also piloting firsthand and experimenting firsthand, again, to try to unpack, what it takes to work more systemically with monitoring, evaluation, and learning. But also we want to find out what are the constraints that lead organizations to take on with different approaches to monitor, evaluation, and learning. And finally, we're codifying and disseminating everything we learn through, developing new guidance, blog posts, and also doing events such as this one.
Andrea?
To share. Yep.
Andrea, sorry to interrupt you. I think if you can be a bit louder, because there are some issues listening to you in the interpretation channel. If you can, yes, please, thank you. Sorry to interrupt.
I'll try. I thought it was already almost screaming, but well. So we are also taking on an adaptive approach ourselves. We are kind of like practicing what we preach, and so like as part of this, the implementation of this initiative, every 6 months we have learning cycles where we reflect on whether we are achieving our objectives, whether we are living up to the principles that we set for our initiative, and also whether we are being able to respond to the core learning questions that we set. And based on what comes out of these reflection moments every 6 months, then we adapt our work plan for the year and beyond in a way that allows us to continuously process what we're learning and embed it into the way we're implementing the initiative. So this is just to say that we don't have a log frame, we don't have a results framework for this project, but rather we have a set of principles and a set of learning questions that are guiding our accountability and also our learning in a way, and of course our performance management. So we're trying to experiment with that. We just came out of our first sense making, first reflection moment at the end of the first learning cycle of 6 months, and these are just it's just like a screenshot of like the process that we went through, which was spiritual and based on Miro. But we're trying to experiment with these sorts of methods also for learning and adaptation firsthand. And this is just a call for you to join us if you're interested, and we could be collaborating on developing case studies, blogs, also piloting. So if you're interested to learn more, at the very minimum, like just stay tuned in this space, but also feel free to reach out if you feel like opportunities for collaborating. And I just want to briefly stop here for a couple of minutes in case there are any burning questions from the audience. And otherwise, I think there are some questions in the chat. Perhaps you can take it. Yeah.
You're seeing the chat there, are you?
Yeah, I see there are some questions. Should we address them now, Charlie, or we can leave it?
Yeah, why not? Couple of
Right, so one question I see is how big is the project though in terms of budget? How do you make sure that certain targets are reached without a log frame. So starting from the last question, how to make sure we can reach some targets even without a log frame. We eventually want to create many systems which are fit for purpose. No? So we're trying to experiment also with hybrid models. For example, for our initiatives, it didn't make sense to necessarily have any targets. We have one kind of like traditional result, which is about tracking to what extent practitioners in this space are taking on new initiatives and new approaches and frameworks for working with machine evaluation learning. So we kind of like set that target alongside our principles and our learning questions. However, we feel like learning questions and principles are much better for the objective of our initiatives. However, in other projects we are developing at the moment, we're also experimenting with hybrid models where we have a learning agenda. We have some principles, but also we have like some more concrete targets and results that are flexible enough, so we can modify them as we go through implementation, but at the same time provide some sort of direction for the project or portfolio that we are implementing. And the project is, we have quite a good budget for experimenting with different things, and also to be able to increase knowledge on the topic for over the next couple of years. So the time frame is until the first half of 2025, and we just started off towards the end of last year. So there are a lot of other questions. So if somebody has
some of those, yeah, I mean, some of those might be addressed in your next slide. So maybe go on to the next, because there's one about how do you think about measuring specific metrics and targets in the context of complexity? How do you collect data for systems change, system momentum, system learning?
Okay, cool. And then we can leave some others for the end, for the Q&A session at the end. So moving forward, I wanted to invite you to join us in our thinking process. And this is one of the themes. It's not the only one, but it's just one of the themes that we are trying to address with this initiative that we're working with. And this is about, how do we document food systems change? How do we know whether the food system in which we're working is shifting, and whether this is like a positive transformation? These are quite, we find them to be like quite some deep questions. And here you feel like you see that there are. This is just like one of the sub questions of those big and overarching learning questions that we're trying to address. So yes, we wanted to invite you to think a bit with us, and make sense a bit like what does this mean when we get practical. So I wanted to present you like a few frameworks that could help you to think about what is systems transformation. This first one is a framework that was developed by the System Innovation Initiative, and it identifies 4 keys that unlock systems transformation. So if you manage to act on one of these keys and affect the way these 4 elements are relate with each other in the system in which you're working, then you are eventually unlocking systems change and systems transformation. And these 4 keys are power. So everything related to the power dynamics within the system, and which are the actors who hold the power, which are the actors that are subject to this power. Like there are different sorts of power that we have explored also recently within our team and in the cohort of practitioners. But yes, if you affect power, is one of the keys to unlock systems transformation. Then another one is relationships. So like the configurations of of relationships between different actors in the system. Resource flows is about, you know, how material, but also immaterial flow through actors within the system. So it's not only about funds and money, but also, like, for example, information. And finally, you know, the purpose of the system is eventually what, you know, like the outcomes that are coming out of you know, the interaction between system dynamics within the system. So if you manage to you know, change the way these elements are configured among themselves, and here there are different visuals of how you could be, you know, conceiving these relationships, then you manage to transform a system, at least according to this framework. Another one is the multi-level perspective. This is one of the most cited frameworks within the literature on systems transformation. And this is about, you know, 3 levels of that are interacting, and eventually, you know, the interaction across these 3 levels could unlock systems transformation. The first one is the landscape, which is basically the overarching processes, trends, and, you know, like externalities that actors cannot, you know, individual actors cannot substantively or directly influence. For example, you know, here we could think of trends, like broad trends, for example, such as climate change, or, you know, shocks such as the COVID-19 pandemic, but also, yeah, mindsets and, you know, general, like, cultural dynamics in a system. Then, you know, we have the regime level, which is the actors, peoples, and organizations, and the rules that are used by these actors to guide their behavior, as well as to guide, you know, the purpose of the system. So this is like the mainstream practice. The actors hold power within the system, and are able to make rules and processes that contribute to regulating, you know, what the outcomes are. And finally, niches are these protected spaces where new technologies, new ways of thinking, new organizations can emerge as radical innovations. And these are like alternative ways of organizing society and addressing societal needs. And if nurtured and grown, and sometimes, you know, movements at the landscape level open up spaces for niches to affect the regime. And eventually, you know, if some of these innovations or new behaviors, the ways of thinking manage to enter and interact with, you know, the mainstream policies, actors, and so on and so forth, they manage to contribute to a shift in the system in which we are working, and that this shift would work towards also changing things at the landscape level as well. And finally, the last framework that I wanted to present to you is the food systems dashboard. This is very much focused on outcomes, and it's a great initiative that a few organizations have developed over the past year. This is an example of a country profile from Uganda, and it shows across, you know, like some variables that are more connected to the environments, and other like to the supply chain, and, you know, other like more individual level, you know, outcomes and community level outcomes. These frameworks allow you, based, like, it puts together, it leverages different sorts of data compiled at the national level, and helps you identify, you know, challenges for you know, areas in which in the food system where there are challenges, other areas where the food system delivering instead positive outcomes. So, for example, we can see that you know, in terms of wasting, there's not much concern under achievement number 5, the 5 years in Uganda. However, if we look at, you know, food insecurity, there are risks, you know, at least at country level. So this is a helpful framework for practitioners to be able to assess, you know, like, which are the outcomes of the food system, that in a specific country, or like also at the global level. And I encourage you to have a look at it. but yes, it focuses on other different levels of the food system. So given this, we wanted to invite you to kind of like, hopefully this was at least a little bit inspiring or useful. And we wanted to invite you to get in trios and, you know, with your fellow practitioners, think about, you know, what would systems transformation look like in the food system in which you're working. So trying to, you know, perhaps think a bit, you know, about these different frameworks. You know, how do they apply to the food system in which you're working? How do they help you, if anyhow, to think about what systems transformation in practice is in your system. So Carlotta, if you can open the breakout rooms.
It's going to be short and sweet. I think just a chance to touch base with some other participants on the call. Probably got about 7 minutes in the group. Then we'll just hear a few comments when you come back, and then we'll be wrapping up.
Thank you.
Maybe just get rid of the slides, everybody. So hopefully in 7 minutes, all three of you got to describe in detail what systems transformation looks like in your sector. That was an example of British humor for you. So yeah, obviously you had no time whatsoever to go into any depth at all on the questions. But anyway, hopefully it gave you a quick break, change of scene, to have a quick connection with a few others in the group, and maybe to touch on one or two reflections. I mean, as I said at the beginning of this call, this is very much a kickoff for us. This is the beginning of the journey. You see, we're holding, I posted in the chat earlier a link to a blog post that includes a bit more framing and more of the learning questions we've got. We're very much in the process of harvesting input from existing good practice methodologies, learning what's out there, working on our own sort of tools and methodologies. So on the slide, it says share an insight from a conversation. Did you find one of the frameworks more useful than others? You might have found the frameworks to be covered rather quickly to comment. But just take 1 or 2 minutes. Let's just say take a minute to share any comment, reflection, or question you got from the breakouts or from the whole session. Just to get, so if we can get a sense of where you are with this. We'll just have a silent pause for a minute. I'll come to you in a second, Nicole. So just write something into the chat.
Hi.
Hi, Natalia.
Hi.
Just waiting for people to write comments into the chat, but you can go and then I'll come back to Nicole. So Natalia, yeah, what's your question or comment?
Well, it was a reflection of my own experience in Ecuador. I was thinking about rethinking monitoring. We have an experience where we designed and implemented a pilot for monitoring for like a pilot for like create a status of free of deforestation production. We were able to establish a status, this status in some parcels, some farmers, and we documented all this documented all this process, and we created this pilot, and we even were able to, based on this experience, we were able to create some commercial we were able to trade this production. On the same time, with the Ministry of Environment, we were able to, with the Ministry of Environment, we were generating the normatives, but we saw that, well, these normatives will be like, these normatives are not organic, and the normatives for monitoring and establishing the status of free production won't be organic, sadly. And as you said, we have to think like monitoring and learning and evaluation has to be organic and be adapting. But normatives, laws, and protocols in institutions are not organic. Pilots can be, and in organizations we are more adaptive, but at an institutional level in the government aren't. So we had this, we couldn't find like a middle point when we wanted to join the pilot information and these normatives, and like assess with this information and to inform normatives, and even we will find more information once the normative is implemented, because the normative was developed like 2 or 3 months ago, and it's not implemented yet, but the pilot has more than 2 years of information, and we know that we will find a lot of information. We need a lot of adaptation to come.
I mean, that's
my experience.
Jessica commented on the multi-level perspective framework, I think. Was it Jessica? Multi-level perspective framework. Yeah, it's very good at looking at how niches and regimes, niches and pilots you can experiment with, but often the kind of so-called regime, the existing structures are not adaptive. And ultimately, that's the job of mainstreaming, is to influence and change those kind of the rules of the game at the regime level. So that's really what this project is about, to learn from what's happening, the good practice that's happening at the niche level, but then how to influence the regime level. We're sort of running out of time, but Nicole, you actually had your hand up first. So
no, I think my question was already answered. Thank you, Charlie.
Okay, yeah, cool. Sorry about that. Very much just a sort of, here we are, this is what we're doing, and keen to collaborate, get input, learn from each other. We'll be running a few more open events and some other sort of curated events. So having registered for this event, you'll all be on there. And Alex, over to you to wrap up.
Thank you, Charlie and Andrea. And yes, I invite all of you to join the Food and Agricultural Commodity Systems community. We have a digital platform where you will be able to find out about all type of upcoming events, including any events related to monitoring, learning, and evaluation. And you will be able as well to connect through the platform with Andrea and Charlie if you would like to continue the discussions. I also invite you to take 1 minute to respond to our feedback survey, which we do after each event that we run. We'll post it in the chat box, and we'll also send the link as part of the post-session email where you will receive all the resources, the PowerPoint presentation and the recording in case you would like to watch some parts again. And just before closing, yes, I invite you to check what we have on offer with the community events. We have many events that we're organizing this month. So I'm not going to have the time now to go through them. But yeah, we have at least 4 events that are coming up in June. I would like also to thank everyone who has been active in organizing this event, so all the delivery team and our interpreter. And yes, wishing everyone a good afternoon, a good rest of the day, good evening, and hope to see you soon. Thank you.